She had 2 leather cases, 9 days of rent money, and one open door left in the world. She got off at the wrong station, and the little girl who came running down the platform, braids flying, arms already open, looked up at her and said in a voice gone suddenly soft, "You smell like flowers. Mama used to smell like flowers." Eleanor Cross had not come here to stay, but some doors don't ask permission before they open. The summer of 1887 had no mercy. It pressed down on the high desert of New Mexico territory like a hand on the back of a man already on his knees, and it did not lift, not even in the evenings when the sun dropped behind the Sangre de Cristo Mountains and the sky turned the color of a bruise healing slowly toward gold. The land out here did not apologize for what it was. It did not soften its edges for strangers. It did not offer shade to those who had not yet earned the right to rest beneath it. Eleanor Cross had not yet earned anything out here. She stood on the wooden platform of Dry Hollow Station with 2 worn leather cases at her feet and a heart so full of things she could not name that she wondered briefly if she might simply fold in half from the weight of it all. The train that had carried her 3 days and 2 nights from Philadelphia had already shrieked its departure whistle and pulled away trailing smoke in indifference behind it, leaving her with the dust and the silence and the particular cruelty of a place that had never been expecting her. She pressed one gloved hand flat against the front of her black lace dress as if she could physically hold herself together through the fabric. The dress had cost her nearly 3 months of her teacher's salary. She had wanted to make a good impression. She had wanted for once in her life to arrive somewhere and be seen as something other than a woman who had already been decided against. She looked down the length of the platform. Then she looked up. Then she looked across the empty stretch of Main Street that ran parallel to the tracks, where a few horses stood tied to posts in front of a general store, where a dog slept in the only patch of shade visible for what seemed like 100 miles, where a town that barely qualified as a town went about its business without once glancing in her direction. No red handkerchief, no green wagon, no James Whitfield. Eleanor pulled the telegram from the small bag she carried against her hip. She had read it so many times that the paper had softened at the folds. The ink blurred slightly where her fingers had pressed too long in moments of doubt. Pine Ridge Station. Meet at the platform. Look for red kerchief and green wagon. J. Whitfield. She read it again, then once more. Pine Ridge Station. This was not Pine Ridge Station. This was Dry Hollow. She had fallen asleep somewhere in the last 2 hours of the journey. The conductor had called the stop, and she had heard the name of the town through the gauze of half-sleep and trusted herself and been wrong, and now she was standing on a platform in a town she had never intended to visit 28 miles from where she was supposed to be, with no money for a hired wagon and no way to know when the next train would come through. The next train would come through in 3 days. She knew this because she had asked the station master, a small man with large ears, who had looked at her with the particular expression of a man who had seen women arrive in the wrong place before and had learned not to offer more than facts. 3 days, he had said. Nothing sooner. The road to Pine Ridge runs through Miller's Creek, and Miller's Creek is running high after last week's rains. Not a road for a woman traveling alone, and not a road for hired men who don't know the crossings. So, 3 days. Eleanor Cross, 24 years old, former teacher at the Philadelphia Ladies' Seminary, owner of 2 leather cases and 1 black lace dress and a small collection of books she had been unwilling to leave behind, stood alone on a platform in Dry Hollow, New Mexico territory, and thought about the remarkable sequence of decisions and misfortunes that had brought her to this exact moment. She had been a good teacher. That much at least was not in dispute. Her students had loved her. Their parents had respected her. She had taught literature and penmanship and arithmetic in the kind of quiet, steady confidence that was the most valuable thing she believed a young woman could carry into the world. And she had taught it well, and for 6 years she had told herself that this was enough. But Headmaster Cornelius Webb had other ideas about what Eleanor Cross was for. She did not think about the details of that conversation standing on the platform. She had trained herself over the months since not to think about it in specific terms, because the specific terms included the grip of his hand on her wrist and the smooth, certain way he had spoken, as though her refusal were simply a misunderstanding that patience and authority would eventually correct. She had looked directly into his eyes, which was not something a woman in her position was expected to do, and she had said no plainly without apology or softening, and he had smiled at her in a way that told her he already knew what came next. 2 weeks later, she had been dismissed. Inadequate professional conduct. Failure to maintain appropriate institutional standards. The advertisement from James Whitfield of Pine Ridge, New Mexico, had appeared in a Philadelphia paper 6 weeks after that, by which point Eleanor's savings would cover exactly 9 more days of rent and 2 meals a day at the boarding house where she had lived since the dismissal. She had answered one advertisement. One. She was not a woman who shopped for opportunity. She was a woman who had run out of road and found one door still open, and she had walked through it. Now she was standing on the wrong platform. She allowed herself exactly 30 seconds to consider crying. Then she decided against it. Not because there was anyone watching, though there was the train who had opened one eye in her direction and then closed it again with the particular contempt of a creature that had seen too much to be impressed. She decided against it because crying would not get her to Pine Ridge or change the fact of the creek or make the 3 days pass any faster, and she had learned a long time ago that the only thing crying ever reliably produced was a headache. She picked up her cases and walked to the end of the platform to figure out what to do next. She had been standing there for perhaps 5 minutes turning over options that were not really options so much as variations of the same impossible situation when she heard it. Small footsteps, running, fast, and then a voice high and clear and carrying something in it that sounded nothing like the ordinary sounds of an ordinary afternoon. Papa, Papa, she's here. She came. She finally came. Eleanor turned. A little girl was running toward her from the direction of the main street, braids flying behind her like flags, a patched calico dress fluttering at her knees. She could not have been more than 7 years old. Her eyes were enormous and brown and lit from somewhere deep inside, the way eyes get when a person has been waiting for something for a very long time and has just seen it arrive. The girl skidded to a stop 2 feet in front of Eleanor. She did not look uncertain. She did not hesitate. She looked up at Eleanor with the absolute uncomplicated conviction of someone for whom the world had just arranged itself exactly as it was supposed to, and she said in a voice gone suddenly soft, "You smell like flowers. Mama used to smell like flowers." Eleanor opened her mouth. She genuinely intended to explain that there had been a mistake, that she was not whoever this child believed her to be, that she was a stranger from Philadelphia who had gotten off the wrong train and was having a fairly difficult afternoon. She did not say any of these things because the girl stepped forward and put her arms around Eleanor's waist and pressed her face into the black lace of Eleanor's dress and held on with the particular fierceness of someone who has been not held for a very long time, and Eleanor found that her capacity for practical explanation had temporarily abandoned her. "I prayed every night," the girl said, her voice muffled slightly by the dress. "Every single night since Mama went to heaven. I told God what I needed, and I asked him to send someone, and I didn't stop asking even when Aunt Ruth said I was being foolish because I knew. I knew he would answer." Eleanor's hand moved of its own accord. She did not make a decision about it. Her palms settled on the back of the girl's dark head, and she stood there on the platform in the brutal August heat, holding a child she had never met, and felt something inside her chest shift without warning, the way a stone shifts at the bottom of a riverbed when the current changes. She heard the footsteps before she saw him. Long strides, deliberate, covering ground with the ground-covering efficiency of someone for whom distance is simply a problem already being solved. Lily. The voice was low and controlled, but it was not quite calm. It was the voice of a man working to keep something contained. Lily Marie Harrison let go of that lady right now. The girl Lily did not let go immediately. She pulled back and looked up at Eleanor with those enormous brown eyes as though she needed one more moment to confirm what she already knew, and then she stepped back half a step and turned to look at the man coming toward them. Eleanor looked at him too. He was tall, with the kind of build that comes not from deliberate effort, but from years of work that simply required it. Short dark hair, neatly trimmed beard, a jaw that looked like it had been decided on in some final uncompromising way. He wore a light blue chambray shirt with the sleeves rolled to the forearm and a tan leather vest over it, and he moved with the measured, self-contained authority of someone who had long since stopped performing composure and had simply become it. His hat was black with a wide brim that put his eyes in partial shadow, but not enough shadow to obscure the fact that those breeds, sharp and serious, were currently doing a very rapid assessment of everything in front of him. He reached them and put his hands gently but firmly on Lily's shoulders. Apologized to this lady for grabbing hold of her without asking. But Papa, she's the one I told you about. The one from my dreams. God sent her. Lily. She smells like flowers just like I said, and she has dark hair and green eyes just like in the dream. Papa, this is her. The man looked at Eleanor over the top of his daughter's head. There was an apology in his expression, but it was a restrained apology, the kind a man offers when he is sorry, but not surprised when this is not the first time this particular situation has unfolded. I'm sorry, he said. She doesn't mean any harm. She's been going through a difficult time and she sometimes... There's no need to apologize, Eleanor said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. She surprised me, that's all. I'm not upset. He studied her for a moment the way he had studied everything else, without hurry, without the pretense of not looking. Then he glanced at the cases beside her and at the empty platform and at the train that was by now a diminishing thread of smoke against the eastern sky. You were supposed to be somewhere else, he said. It was not quite a question. Pine Ridge, I fell asleep and missed the stop. She kept her voice level because there was no benefit in anything else. The next train comes through in 3 days. The road through Miller's Creek is running too high to attempt by hired wagon, according to the station master. I don't have money for alternative arrangements, and there appears to be no hotel in Dry Hollow. He listened to all of this without expression. There's no hotel, he confirmed. It's not much more than a water stop. So I've gathered. A pause. He looked at Lily, who was looking at Eleanor with an expression of serene patience, as though she had already seen how this was going to end and was simply waiting for the adults to arrive at the same conclusion. We have a spare room, Cole Harrison said. My sister-in-law lives a quarter-mile down the road. She comes by most days to help with Lily, so there won't be any question about the arrangement being improper. He paused. If you're worried about that, I'm worried about sleeping on a train platform for 3 days, Eleanor said. Something moved briefly across his face. It might have been the beginning of a smile, though it did not complete itself. Then we'd better get your cases, he said. His name was Cole Harrison. He told her this on the walk to the wagon factually without preamble, the way a man states things when he has found that extra words rarely improve a situation. His daughter was Lily, which she already knew. The ranch was 20 minutes north, which she didn't. Lily walked between them, and within the first 90 seconds of the walk, she had communicated the following. The horse's name was Bucknot Brownie, as her father called him, because her father didn't believe in naming horses, and this was a personal failing she had decided to work around. The dog outside the general store was named Henry. The woman who ran the boarding house had 7 cats and a disposition that Lily described with remarkable precision for a 7-year-old as like weather that can't decide. She herself had a favorite reading spot by the creek where wild roses grew even in the dry months, which she felt was proof of something, though she hadn't yet decided what. Cole said at intervals, Lily. This appeared to function less as a corrective and more as an acknowledgement that he was still present and had heard everything. Eleanor watched him help Lily into the wagon with the practiced ease of a man who had done this 10,000 times. She watched him check the rigging on the horses with the same unhurried thoroughness. She watched him lift her cases with one arm as though they weighed nothing, which they did not, though they were not light, and settle them in the wagon bed without comment. He was a man who expressed his character through his hands rather than his words, she thought. You could read him more accurately by watching what he did than by listening to what he said. He helped her up onto the wagon bench with his hand at her elbow, briefly not lingering. It's not much of a ranch, he said as they rolled away from the platform and the track and the fading echo of the train. Decent land, good water rights. But I won't pretend it's what you're used to. Well, you don't know what I'm used to, Eleanor said. He considered this for a moment. Fair enough, he said. The land opened up around them as they left the town behind, and Eleanor, who had spent her entire life inside cities, where every horizon was blocked by buildings, felt the desert do something to her that she had not anticipated. It was not comfortable. The sky was too large, the distances too absolute, the colors too extreme, all that burned gold and ochre and the hard, bright blue overhead. But there was something in it that her chest responded to before her mind could form an opinion. Something that felt like the land was not pretending to be anything other than what it was, and she found she respected that even as it unsettled her. Lily pointed out landmarks. This was where Papa had found her when she wandered off following a butterfly last spring and gotten turned around in the scrub brush. That ridge was where a golden eagle nested. The dry creek bed to the east flooded every spring and smelled like wild onion for 2 weeks afterward. "Do you sing?" Lily asked, turning her full brown-eyed attention on Eleanor. "Sometimes. Mama used to sing when she cooked. Papa sings sometimes too, but he sounds like a—" Lily glanced at her father, made a small calculation. "He sounds like he's doing his best," she finished. Cole looked straight ahead at the road. "That is the most diplomatic thing you have ever said in your life," he told her. "I've been practicing," Lily said with some satisfaction. Eleanor laughed. It came out before she had decided to produce it, spontaneous and genuine, and she felt it move through her like something thawing the way frozen ground sounds when the temperature finally rises. Cole glanced sideways at her. Just once quickly, the way a man looks when something catches him off guard. The Harrison Ranch appeared at the end of a long, unpaved track, and it was as he had said, not much. The house was adobe and timber solid and low against the landscape with a covered porch wrapping around two sides. The barn was newer than the house built, with the kind of careful attention that suggested priorities clearly ordered, shelter the animals first. A garden plot behind a rabbit-damaged fence showed the remnants of summer vegetables. Corrals of rough-cut pine held 4 horses and some 30 head of cattle, visible in the middle distance. There were no curtains on the windows. It was, Eleanor thought, a house built entirely by someone who knew exactly how to keep things standing, but had not yet figured out what to do with the spaces in between. "It's honest," she said when Cole helped her down from the wagon and waited, she could tell, for some reaction. He looked at her. "The place," she said. "It doesn't pretend to be more than it is. That's harder to come by than it sounds." He was quiet for a moment. "Most people who come from somewhere else say it needs work," he said. "Most people who come from somewhere else are comparing it to somewhere else," she said. Another of those sideways glances. Longer this time. He showed her into the house, and she understood it immediately in the way you sometimes understand something large and true without needing to be told. The kitchen was functional and clean scrubbed to the bone. The main room had good bones and empty walls. The furniture was solid and worn, and arranged the way a man arranges furniture when he is thinking about utility and not about the way things feel. And on the mantel above the stone fireplace, set in a plain wooden frame, a single photograph. A woman. Dark eyes, something in the curve of her mouth that you could see in Lily's mouth if you knew to look. "That's Mama," Lily said softly, appearing at Eleanor's elbow. "She was beautiful, wasn't she?" "Very beautiful," Eleanor said. "She used to sing when she cooked. She made the best apple pie in the whole territory. Papa tries, but the crust is always—" "Lily," Cole said quietly from behind them. "It's true, though." "I know it's true. That doesn't mean it needs to be said every time." Lily considered this philosophical position briefly, and then appeared to decide the conversation was complete. She took Eleanor's hand with the naturalness of a child who has made a decision and is not going back on it, and led her down the short hallway to the spare room. He set her cases just inside the door. On the small table by the window lay a single iron key, which he picked up and placed in her hand without ceremony or explanation. "Lock is on the inside," he said. "Key is yours." He did not explain why this mattered. She understood anyway. In a house where everything had been decided by loss, he was giving her one thing to decide herself. It was small and clean and smelled of recent airing. A narrow bed with a pieced quilt. A washstand with a china basin slightly chipped at the rim. A single window that looked west toward the mountains where the light was already deepening toward amber. In the corner, a basket of fabric scraps. On the small table by the window, a piece of embroidery, half-finished needles still threaded, as though the person working on it had simply stepped out for a moment and intended to return. Eleanor looked at it for a moment without speaking. "This was Grace's sewing room," Cole said from the doorway, and she understood from his tone that this was a thing requiring some effort to say, and that he was saying it anyway because he was a man who dealt in facts. She liked the morning light. "Lily's right that we don't use it. We haven't been able to." A pause. "But you're welcome to it for as long as you need." Eleanor turned to face him. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison." "Cole," he said. Then he looked briefly as though he regretted saying it. Then he looked as though he had decided not to regret it. "Cole is fine." He left her to settle in, and she stood at the window for a long moment, watching the mountains change color as the light shifted, and thought about the fact that she was standing in a dead woman's sewing room in a town she had never intended to visit, and that somehow, in a way she could not yet articulate, this felt less like misfortune than like something else entirely. She cooked dinner. This was not a calculated decision. She had looked in the kitchen as she looked in any room she entered and assessed what was there. Flour lard dried beans, salt pork, a tin of coffee, eggs from a small ceramic bowl near the window, and on the back shelf a chicken she had not expected, already dressed and ready. She had put on the apron she found hanging on the back of the kitchen door, and she had cooked because cooking was something her hands knew how to do without consulting the rest of her, and because there was something in the orderly progress of preparation and the logic of one step following the next that settled her mind when nothing else would. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes with good thick gravy, green beans cooked low and slow with the salt pork until they were soft and rich and tasted like summer, and with the last of the afternoon's milk, a simple custard. Lily sat at the kitchen table while Eleanor worked. She was ostensibly practicing her letters on a small slate, but mostly she was watching Eleanor's every movement with the focused attention of someone recording something important. "You move like you're dancing," she said. "Do I?" Mama moved like that too when she cooked, like she was hearing music that nobody else could hear. Lily pressed the chalk lightly against the slate. "Papa doesn't move like that. Papa moves like everything weighs more than it should." Eleanor kept stirring the gravy and said nothing because sometimes the best response to a true thing is simply to let it be true. Cole came in from the barn just as she was setting the table. He stopped in the doorway and she did not look at him directly, but she heard the sound of his boots go still on the floor, the way a man's step goes still when he walks into a room that smells like something his memory has been quietly guarding for 2 years without permission. He sat down. He ate with the focused, unhurried attention of a man eating a meal that was worth eating, not just fueling himself the way you refuel a lamp when it's running low. He didn't comment on the food, but he ate everything and was quiet in a way that was different from his earlier quiet, softer, somehow less armored. "This is the best meal I've had in 2 years," he said eventually, and then looked immediately as though he wished he hadn't said it out loud. Lily looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked at her plate. "That's not very long," Lily said helpfully. 2 years isn't very long." "Lily," Cole said. "Well, it isn't. And Miss Ellie should know that the bar isn't actually that high, so she shouldn't feel too proud." Eleanor pressed her lips together to keep from laughing. She saw Cole look down at the table with the quality of expression she suspected was suppressed amusement, fighting against a lifetime of habits, pointing in the opposite direction. "I'll keep that in mind," Eleanor said. After dinner, she washed the dishes, while Lily dried standing on a wooden crate to reach the counter. Still talking always about the chickens she had named, and the calf born in the spring, and the spot by the creek where the wild roses grew through even the driest summers, which she had decided was proof that beauty was more stubborn than difficulty if you gave it enough time. Cole sat in the main room within earshot, repairing something with a needle and heavy thread, and Eleanor was aware of him in the particular way you become aware of a person when their silence is itself a form of attention. "Do you know any songs?" Lily asked. "Mama used to sing to me at bedtime." "Papa tries, but I mind it." "I heard about Papa's singing," Eleanor said. "Who told you?" "A very reliable source." Lily giggled and glanced toward the main room. "Can you sing something while we finish the dishes?" Eleanor began with Shenandoah because it was a river song, and river songs had a way of feeling like home, even in the desert. And her voice, which had always been her one unambiguous gift, moved through the small kitchen and out into the evening air with the kind of ease that comes from something genuinely felt rather than performed. She heard Cole's movement in the next room go still. Lily stopped drying the dish she was holding and just stood with it in her hands, eyes wide, the way a person looks when they hear something that lands in a place they hadn't known was waiting. When the song ended, the silence held for a moment. "You have a beautiful voice," Cole said from the doorway. He was leaning against the frame with the repaired piece of harness in his hands, and there was something in his expression that she could not fully read, something that was not grief exactly, but that had grown up alongside grief for long enough that the two had become intertwined. "Thank you for sharing it." He looked at her for one more moment, then pushed off the frame and went back to his chair. She tucked Lily into bed an hour later with Cole's quiet permission granted, when Lily had asked in a tone that made refusal seem like a theoretical concept. The girl held Eleanor's hand in both of hers and looked up at the ceiling with the expression of someone working through something important. "Miss Ellie," she said. "Yes. I know you have to go to Pine Ridge in 3 days. I know you have someone waiting for you there." She paused. "But I want you to know something." "What's that?" "We need you more than he does." She said it simply with the uncomplicated certainty of someone who has thought about this carefully and arrived at an honest conclusion. "I don't know Mr. Whitfield. He might be very nice, but he has a whole ranch and a whole town and a whole life, and all he's missing is someone to share it with. Papa and I were missing more than that." She turned her head on the pillow to look at Eleanor directly. "We're missing whatever it is that makes a house remember what it is." Eleanor sat beside the bed for a long time after Lily's breathing deepened into sleep, her hand still resting on the small one that had finally let go. The words moved through her quietly, the way water moves through stone, finding every crack. When she came back to the main room, Cole was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold at his elbow, looking at a piece of paper he had been writing on. He looked up when she entered, and then with a motion that was not quite quick enough to be natural, turned the paper over. Eleanor saw it. She saw him see her see it. She sat down across from him and wrapped her hands around the cup of tea she had made for herself before putting Lily to bed. She did not mention the paper. Neither did he. They sat in the particular silence of two people who have just acknowledged something without speaking it aloud. "Your wife," Eleanor said eventually. "When did she pass 2 years ago this September?" His voice was level. "Fever. The doctor said there was nothing to be done. She was sick 4 days, and then she was gone. Lily was 5. "I'm sorry." He nodded, accepting this without deflection. "Grace was a remarkable woman. She built this place with me, board by board. When things went wrong, and things always went wrong out here, she never complained. She always said God had a plan, and we were meant to trust it." He was quiet for a moment. "I've had a harder time with that philosophy since she left." "I imagine so." He looked at her with an expression that was, for the first time since she had met him, something other than controlled. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Why does a woman with your education and your capability answer a mail-order advertisement? You could teach anywhere. You could build a life in a city. Why would you agree to come out here and marry a stranger?" Eleanor looked at the lamp flame for a moment. "Because the city stopped being an option," she said, "and because the advertisement was the only door that was still open." He waited. "I was dismissed from my position," she said, "by a man who believed that a woman's refusal was simply an invitation to be more persistent. When I made my position clear, he found another way to make his position clear in return. I left Philadelphia with 9 days of rent money and one open door, and I walked through it." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of a man receiving information and giving it the weight it deserved. "I'm sorry that happened to you," he said. "I'm not anymore," Eleanor said. And then she was surprised to find that she meant it. She rose to rinse her cup and say goodnight, and she was almost at the hallway when she stopped. She turned back. On the kitchen table, where he had turned it over too quickly, she could see the edge of the paper he had been writing on. She did not read it. She was not that kind of person. But she could see the handwriting, the careful, deliberate letters of a man who wrote slowly and meant every word, and she could see enough of the first line before she looked away. "I want to find someone who will love Lily the way she deserves." She carried those words down the hallway and into the small room with the half-finished embroidery and the window that looked west. She lay on the narrow bed beneath the pieced quilt and listened to the coyotes singing somewhere out in the dark, and the wind moving through the sage, and the particular breathing silence of a house that had been waiting. She thought for something it could not name. She was a practical woman. She had always been a practical woman. She knew that 3 days was not long enough to know anything important about a person, that she had obligations in Pine Ridge, that James Whitfield had paid for her passage and was waiting on a platform with a red kerchief. She also knew what she had felt when Lily put her arms around her waist on the platform. She also knew the sound of Cole Harrison's step going still in a doorway because he had walked into a kitchen that smelled like something worth coming home to. She also knew what it felt like to sit across a table from another person in an honest silence and not need to fill it. Outside, the coyote called again. its voice carrying across the dark desert in a way that sounded less like loneliness and more like an announcement. The wind shifted and brought with it the smell of sage and the faraway scent of rain gathering somewhere over the mountains. Eleanor closed her eyes. In 3 days, a train would come through Dry Hollow headed east to Pine Ridge. She thought about James Whitfield, who was by all accounts a decent man. She thought about the life she had planned when she boarded the train in Philadelphia, the specific and modest shape of it, the safety of it, the way it had seemed standing on that platform with her two cases and her uncertainty like a reasonable thing to reach for. Then she thought about Lily's voice saying, "We're missing whatever it is that makes a house remember what it is." And she thought about the look on Cole Harrison's face when he had stopped in the doorway to the kitchen. And she thought about the half-finished embroidery on the table by the window, the needle still threaded patient as something that has learned to wait. She did not make a decision that night, but something in her had already begun to move the way a stone begins to move at the bottom of a riverbed when the current finally changes quietly and without announcement towards something it had not yet been given a name for. She did not know as she fell asleep to the sound of the New Mexico night that 300 miles to the south in Santa Fe, in a well-appointed office that smelled of lemon polish and expensive perfume, a woman named Victoria Ashford was holding a property assessment of the Harrison Ranch between two fingers and saying to her lawyer, George Aldridge, in a voice smooth as river water over stone, "Buy the debt." And she did not know that a clock had already begun counting down, set in motion not by the accident of a missed train station, but by the cold arithmetic of a woman who had never in her life wanted something that money couldn't eventually obtain. She did not know any of this. She only knew that for the first time in months, possibly years, she fell asleep without needing to remind herself that things would be all right. She simply knew it. And the house around her, the small adobe house with its empty walls and its unmade curtains, and its single photograph on the mantel, seemed to settle slightly on its foundations, the way a house settles when something that has been missing has quietly, without ceremony, come back. The morning of the third day came in gray, and still the sky, the color of pewter beaten flat, the mountains to the west swallowed entirely by clouds that had been building since before dawn. Cole had the wagon ready before she had finished her coffee. Eleanor stood in the kitchen with the cup warm between her palms and looked at the table where for 3 mornings in a row they had eaten breakfast together, the three of them, with Lily talking enough for everyone, and Cole eating with the focused, appreciative attention of a man who had remembered that food was something more than fuel, and she thought about the specific and irreversible nature of what she was about to do. The telegram office was in Patterson's general store. Mr. Patterson himself was a compact, genial man with quick eyes and the practiced conversational ease of someone who understood that a general store was as much an information exchange as a goods exchange, and who had long since made peace with both functions. He handed Eleanor the pencil and the paper form with the cheerful efficiency of a man who had dispatched hundreds of such messages and would dispatch hundreds more. She wrote it without hesitation because hesitation would not have improved it. "Mr. Whitfield cannot complete the journey. Circumstances have changed. I wish you well in your search. With sincere regret, E. Cross." She pushed it across the counter. "Mr." Patterson read it with the particular alertness of a man who has just been handed something more interesting than the usual cattle prices and dry goods orders, and then looked at her with his quick eyes, and then looked past her at Cole, who was standing near the door, examining a display of harness hardware with the focused concentration of a man who was absolutely not listening to anything. "Send it right away, please," Eleanor said. "Yes, ma'am," Mr. Patterson said, and she could already hear in the slight expansion of warmth in his voice the first movement of a story that would reach every household in Dry Hollow before nightfall. She turned and walked toward the door, and Cole held it open for her without comment, and they walked to the wagon in silence. And he helped her up onto the bench and then climbed up himself and took the reins, and they sat for a moment side by side without speaking, while the gray morning pressed down around them. "You're not going," he said. It was not a question. "No. Lily will be glad." She looked at the street ahead of them at the quiet town going about its morning. "And you," she said. He was quiet long enough that she began to think he was not going to answer. "Then me too," he said. 2 words, and they cost him something she could tell, not because he didn't mean them, but because meaning something and saying it out loud were still 2 different territories for Cole Harrison, and the distance between them was not always easily crossed. He clicked his tongue and set the horses moving, and she let the two words settle into the space between them like something planted small and quiet and with roots already beginning. They had been back at the ranch for perhaps 3 hours when Ruth Garrett arrived. Eleanor was in the kitchen teaching Lily to make biscuits, which was, she had discovered, less a cooking lesson and more a philosophical dialogue punctuated by flour. Lily held opinions about biscuit making that she had arrived at independently and was not immediately willing to revise, and Eleanor found herself in the unfamiliar position of someone who was genuinely enjoying an argument she was technically winning. Ruth Garrett walked through the front door without knocking. This, Eleanor would come to understand, was not rudeness so much as long-established habit, the habit of a woman who had been coming in and out of this house for 2 years, with the authority of someone who believed, not entirely without reason, that she was the reason it was still standing. She was 42 years old and dressed in the practical, unembellished way of a woman who regarded the consideration of appearance as a luxury she had categorically declined. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back with the severity of a decision made once and not revisited. Her eyes were the same dark shade as Grace's in the photograph, and they moved through the kitchen in one swift, comprehensive sweep that took in the flour on the counter, the biscuits taking shape under Lily's hands, Eleanor standing beside her with an apron tied at her waist, and arrived at a conclusion before a single word had been spoken. "Who are you?" she said. "Eleanor Cross." Eleanor kept her voice pleasant and direct. "You must be Ruth." "I am." Ruth looked at her with the measured, careful attention of a woman conducting an assessment. "Where is Cole?" "Barn, I believe." Ruth went to the back door, opened it, and called Cole's name with the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. Then she turned back and stood in the middle of the kitchen with her hands at her sides and looked at Eleanor the way people look at things they have not decided what to do with yet. "Cole explained you arrived by accident," she said. "That's right. And now you've decided to stay. For the time being." "For the time being." Ruth repeated it in a tone that transformed it from a statement of intention into a category requiring examination. "Miss Cross, I want to be direct with you." "I'd appreciate that." "I have spent the last 2 years keeping this household from coming apart at the seams. I helped Cole through the worst of his grief. I have been here for Lily in ways that do not have a tidy name. I know what this family needs, and I know what it does not need, and what it does not need is a woman from Philadelphia who answered a newspaper advertisement and got off at the wrong station deciding on 3 days' acquaintance that she belongs here." Eleanor held the woman's gaze and kept her voice steady. "I understand why you'd see it that way," she said. "Do you?" "Yes, you love them. That's clear in every word you've just said. Love makes people protective, and protection sometimes looks like obstruction from the outside." She set down the rolling pin she had been holding. "I'm not here to take anything from you, Mrs. Garrett. I'm not here to replace anyone or rewrite what this family has been through. I came in through an accidental door, and I'm still here because something in me recognized this place, and I'm trying to be honest with myself about what that means." Ruth looked at her for a long moment. The kitchen held its breath. Then Ruth said, "I have arranged for a woman to come and meet Cole. Her name is Victoria Ashford. She is a widow from Santa Fe. She has means experience and the kind of practical capability that a ranch like this requires. She will arrive next week." Cole appeared in the back doorway behind her. His expression did not change, but something shifted in the set of his shoulders that Eleanor had already learned to read. "Ruth," he said quietly, "I did what I thought was best." "I know you did." He came into the kitchen. "But this is my house, and you don't get to invite people into it without asking me first." A pause. Not anymore. Ruth turned to look at her brother-in-law with the expression of someone absorbing a blow they had known was coming. "Cole, you're not thinking clearly. This woman has been here 3 days. I know how long she's been here. And you're already—" "I know what I am," he said. "Go home, Ruth. I'll come by later in the week." Ruth left, not slammed the door exactly, but closed it with a definiteness that conveyed everything slamming would have conveyed while maintaining the dignity she was not willing to surrender. Her footsteps crossed the porch and faded. The kitchen was quiet. Lily looked from her father to Eleanor, and then back to her father. Then she looked down at the biscuit she was shaping and pressed it very carefully into the pan with both thumbs. "Aunt Ruth means well," she said. Yes, she does, Cole agreed, but she doesn't always know what well looks like from the inside. Cole looked at his daughter with the expression of a man confronting unexpected wisdom from a direction he had not anticipated. No, he said, she doesn't always. Eleanor picked up the rolling pin and handed Lily the cutter. Let's get these in the oven, she said. The biscuits were perfect. They rose high and split at the top, just the way biscuits are supposed to, and they ate them warm with butter and the dark honey from the hive Cole kept near the east fence, and Lily ate 4 and declared this a personal record. Cole ate 2 and said nothing, but he ate them with the same focused, appreciative attention he had brought to every meal she had cooked, and she understood this to be from him an eloquent statement. 3 days passed, then 4, then a week. Eleanor did not think of this as staying. She thought of it as not leaving yet, which was a different thing, and she was careful about the distinction because she was a precise woman and precision mattered to her. But the days arranged themselves with a natural order that she had not manufactured and did not resist, and the arrangement felt more each morning when she woke to the light coming through Grace's window and heard Lily in the kitchen and smelled the coffee Cole had made before going out to the barn, less like something temporary and more like something she was in the middle of rather than on the edge of. She started teaching. This happened the way many useful things happen by accident, followed by decision. Tom Bradley from the neighboring ranch came by one morning to discuss fence lines with Cole, and his 3 children came with him, and while the men talked over maps and property surveys, Eleanor found herself with 3 young faces and 3 hours to fill, and she filled them the way she knew how. By the afternoon, Mrs. Bradley had come to collect her children and found the oldest one reading aloud from one of Eleanor's books, while the 2 younger ones drew letters on slates she had improvised from the flat, dark stones near the creek. Within the week, she had 4 students. Within the week after that, she had 7. She held lessons in the barn on the days when Cole could spare the space, or on the porch when the weather allowed, or in the kitchen when it did not. She wrote letters to her friends in Philadelphia describing the work and asking them to send whatever they could spare from the seminary's discarded materials, and 2 of them wrote back with boxes of primers and chalk and arithmetic cards, and from her friend Caroline, a letter that made her sit down on the porch steps and read twice because it contained information she had not expected. The Boston School Board was interested in purchasing her curriculum guides for district-wide use. Enclosed was a bank draft for the first payment with more to follow each quarter. She sat with the draft in her hands and thought about the particular and unpredictable way that doors open. You spend months pushing against walls, and then you look up, and there's a door you hadn't noticed before standing open, with light coming through it from a direction you weren't watching. Cole found her still sitting on the porch steps when he came in from checking the east fence. Good news, he said, reading something in her expression. Unexpected news, she said, which is turning out to be the same thing. She told him about the draft and the school board. He listened with his arms folded and the sun in his eyes and the expression he wore when he was thinking carefully about something and wanted to get it right. That's your money, he said when she had finished. I know that. I don't want you to feel any obligation. I don't feel obligation, she said. I feel invested. There's a difference. She looked at him directly. I want to put part of this towards Samuel Ford's loan. Don't tell me no before you've thought about it. He thought about it. She could see him working through the objections, the pride and the practicality, and the deep-rooted reluctance of a man who had built his life on not needing what he couldn't provide for himself. And she waited because she had learned that Cole Harrison arrived at honest conclusions if you gave him enough space to get there. We'll talk about it, he said. It was not yes, but it was not no, and from Cole Harrison, that was a distance she was learning to understand as significant. She was in the kitchen one evening, 11 days after her arrival, preparing the dough for the following morning's bread, when she heard the sound she had been dreading since Ruth's visit. An actual carriage, not a wagon. A carriage with the kind of springs that absorbed the road, rather than transmitting it, driven by a man in a city coat who handled the reins with the discomfort of someone more accustomed to being driven than driving. Lily was at the window before Eleanor had finished drying her hands. Fancy lady, Lily said in the tone of a naturalist observing an unfamiliar species. Very fancy. Her dress cost more than the barn. Eleanor came to stand beside her. Victoria Ashford stepped down from the carriage with the unhurried grace of a woman who had practiced arriving. She was perhaps 32, dark-haired, wearing a traveling suit the color of deep burgundy that moved with her body in the way expensive cloth does, as though it had been persuaded rather than constructed. Behind her, a thin man in a city suit with a leather portfolio under his arm descended and surveyed the ranch with the professional, dispassionate gaze of a man making calculations. Eleanor recognized the gaze. She had seen it on the face of Headmaster Webb. It was the gaze of a person whose primary relationship with the world was one of acquisition. She untied the apron and hung it on the door hook and walked out onto the porch. Cole had come from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth, moving to the front of the house, with the particular alertness of a man who has not been warned but is not entirely surprised. Victoria Ashford looked at Eleanor, standing on the porch, and performed in a single upward glance a complete and damning assessment. "You must be the governess," she said. Her voice was warm and smooth, the warmth as calibrated as everything else about her. "I'm Eleanor Cross," Eleanor said. "Mr. Harrison's guest." "How interesting." Victoria smiled in a way that acknowledged the claim without crediting it. She turned the smile toward Cole, and it became something different, warmer in a different direction, carefully aimed. "Mr. Harrison, Ruth has told me so much about you. I'm Victoria Ashford. I hope my coming early isn't an inconvenience. I felt there was no reason to delay, and I find that first impressions are best made before anyone has had time to prepare a performance." This last sentence was delivered while her eyes returned briefly to Eleanor, and its meaning was entirely clear. Cole looked at her, then at Aldridge, then at the portfolio. "Who's the man with the leather brim?" he said. "My attorney, George Aldridge, and there are some business matters I thought we might discuss if you're amenable." She smiled again. "Purely informal at this stage." "What kind of business?" "Why don't we go inside?" Victoria said. "It looks like rain." They went inside. Lily stationed herself behind Eleanor with the studied invisibility of a child who has learned that adults forget you're in the room if you're quiet enough, and she watched Victoria Ashford move through the front room of the Harrison house, the way a prospective buyer moves through a property noting load-bearing walls and water damage. Victoria looked at the photograph on the mantel. She looked at the empty window frames. She looked at the functional, undecorated arrangement of the furniture. She said with a warmth designed to sound like sympathy, "You've been managing beautifully, Mr. Harrison, truly. A man raising a child alone in a place like this. The community owes you a great deal of respect." Cole stood in the middle of the room with his arms at his sides and said nothing. Victoria settled herself into the chair by the window with the naturalness of someone choosing the best seat in a room they have already decided they own. "Mr. Harrison, I'm not a woman who wastes words. Ruth tells me you've been struggling with a debt situation. A loan against the property coming due within the month." Cole's expression didn't change. "Ruth talks too much." "Perhaps, but the information is accurate, isn't it?" Victoria folded her hands in her lap. $600, I understand, and the ranch operating on thin margins with this year's beef prices being what they are." She paused. "I would like to help. I don't need help from a stranger. We're not strangers. We have Ruth in common, and we have," she gestured to encompass the room, "the ranch, the life, this in common. Or we could, Mr. Harrison. I'm a practical woman. I'm not here to play at sentimentality. I'm here because I believe in the direct approach. I have the means to pay your debt. I have the experience of running a large property. I have—" Her eyes moved to Eleanor, one brief, precise glance. "No complications." The word complications hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor felt Lily's hand find hers behind her back. She did not say anything. Not yet. Aldridge opened the portfolio and laid papers on the table, with the practiced efficiency of a man who has done this before, who knows the moment when the presentation of documents changes the atmosphere in a room. "Mrs. Ashford has already made preliminary inquiries regarding the loan," he said. "It's a fairly simple matter from a legal standpoint to buy the debt," Cole said. Aldridge paused. "You didn't come here to offer to pay off my loan out of generosity," Cole said. "You came here to buy it, so that you hold the paper instead of the bank, so that when I can't pay, the property comes to you instead of reverting to the bank's inventory." Victoria's expression did not flicker. "That's a rather uncharitable reading of a straightforward offer of assistance." "Is it accurate?" A pause. "It's a business arrangement that would benefit both parties." It would benefit one party, Cole said, and it would cost the other one everything they built. The room held the silence of that statement for a long moment. Then Lily, who had been quiet for so long that everyone in the room had, as she had calculated, ceased to consciously register her presence, said clearly from behind Eleanor, "Why do you want our ranch, Mrs. Ashford?" Victoria looked at the child with the kind of surprised attention adults give children when they are caught off guard by a question they would have declined to answer from another adult. "I don't want your ranch, sweetheart. I want to help your father. But helping him the way you're describing means he has to do what you want or you take the ranch. That's not help. That's a trap." Lily's voice was steady and factual, not hostile, the voice of someone making an observation they believe is worth making. Help is when someone gives you something without the trap part. Victoria's warmth cooled by several degrees. "Children shouldn't—" "Lily is right," Eleanor said. Everyone looked at her. She let the moment sit for one breath, two. She had been deciding without fully realizing she was deciding since the moment she saw Victoria step out of that carriage. Now the decision had finished making itself. "What Mrs. Ashford is describing isn't assistance," she said, keeping her voice level and her eyes on Victoria's. "It's acquisition with an additional step. She wants the ranch. She wants it because it has good water rights and sits on the cattle road, and she has the money to want things and the patience to wait for people's situations to become desperate enough to accept terms they wouldn't otherwise accept." She looked at Aldridge. "Is that a fair description of the arrangement, Mr. Aldridge?" Aldridge said nothing, which was, she had always found, the most revealing kind of answer. "Miss Cross," Victoria said, and the warmth in her voice had been replaced now by something that was not quite cold, more like the absence of warmth, like a room from which a fire has recently been removed. "You have been in this house for less than 2 weeks. You arrived by accident. You are, I understand, a dismissed school teacher who answered a mail-order advertisement and managed to miss her intended destination. I don't know what arrangement you and Mr. Harrison have reached, but I can assure you that your position here is considerably less stable than you may believe." Eleanor looked at her. She did not feel the way she had felt in Cornelius Webb's office, the cold, nauseating certainty of someone in a situation they cannot escape. She felt instead something she had not felt in a long time, something steady and clear, and held from underneath by the specific gravity of knowing exactly where you stand and why. "My position here," she said, "is that I am standing next to someone I care about in a house I've put my hands to beside a child I love. You can call that unstable if you'd like. It doesn't match my experience of it." Victoria rose from her chair. The performance of warmth had been set aside, and what remained was simply the woman herself, which was, Eleanor thought, actually more impressive, harder-edged, and more real. "Mr. Harrison," she said, "think carefully. The loan comes due in 30 days. Mr. Aldridge can have the paperwork ready within the week. All it requires is your signature." "No," Cole said. "You might reconsider when—" "No, he said again. Same word, same tone. The kind of no that has been considered already and does not require reconsideration." Victoria and Aldridge left. The carriage rolled away down the track, and the three of them stood on the porch and watched it go. Cole with his arms folded, Lily still holding Eleanor's hand. "She'll come back," Cole said. "I know, Marcel," Eleanor said. "She already bought the debt. That's what Aldridge was going to tell me. The papers in that portfolio were the transfer documents from the bank. She already owns the loan." He was quiet for a moment. 30 days. "Samuel Ford," Eleanor said. Cole shook his head. "I won't ask him." "You won't need to ask. He'll come." He looked at her. "He will," she said. "Give it until tomorrow." Samuel Ford came the next morning before breakfast, riding his old bay gelding, with the unhurried certainty of a man who has thought the matter through, and arrived, and he dismounted at the gate and came to the porch and said to Cole without greeting or preamble, "I heard what happened. Before you say anything, hear me out." Cole started to say something. "I said hear me out." Ford sat on the porch step with the settled authority of someone who has been sitting on porch steps for 40 years longer than the person he is talking to. "Your wife came to sit with my Martha every week for the last 2 years of her life. You know that. She came in all weather. She read to her when her eyes got too bad to read herself, and she sat with her on the bad nights when the pain was something the medicine couldn't reach, and she held her hand at the end." He looked at Cole directly. Grace Harrison was the best neighbor and the finest human being I have encountered in 68 years of watching human beings. I owe her a debt I can't pay because she's gone, but I can pay this one. Cole was quiet for a long time. $600, Ford said. No interest. You pay me back in cattle or labor or both over 5 years at whatever pace the ranch allows. That's the whole arrangement. No trap, no papers. My word and yours. Lily, who had appeared in the doorway the moment she heard horses, walked out onto the porch and hugged Samuel Ford around the middle without warning or announcement. Ford stood very still for a moment, his arms slightly out to his sides like a man who has just found himself holding something fragile and is not certain of the correct technique. Then he put one weathered hand on the back of her head with the careful, tentative gentleness of someone who doesn't do this often, but understands its importance. I'm not generally a hugging man, he said. I know, Lily said. You should try it more. I'll consider it, Ford said. Then to Cole, do we have a deal? Cole put his hand out. Ford shook it. Eleanor watched from the kitchen doorway and did not say anything because some things are complete on their own, and adding words to them is like adding color to a rainbow. The 30 days were not peaceful. Victoria Ashford did not leave Dry Hollow. She took the better room at the boarding house, and she deployed herself through the community with the systematic thoroughness of a military campaign, donating money to the church roof fund, buying rounds at the saloon, commissioning repairs, to the schoolhouse she had no children in, and having long, warm conversations with anyone who would sit still long enough over tea or whiskey or whatever the occasion required. She collected information and she distributed carefully shaped versions of it, and she was very good at both. And Eleanor watched the edges of the community shift under her influence, the way soil shifts under water pressure slowly and not visibly until it collapses. She heard what was being said from Mrs. Patterson, who told her in the apologetic, careful way of someone delivering news they would rather not carry. Victoria was saying that Eleanor had been dismissed from her Philadelphia position for improper conduct, that she had answered multiple mail-order advertisements, shopping for the most advantageous situation, that her presence in the Harrison household was opportunistic at best and predatory at worst, a woman with no prospects attaching herself to a vulnerable man who didn't know better. Eleanor listened to all of this and felt something that was not quite anger and not quite hurt, more like the recognition of a familiar pattern, the same pattern she had seen in Cornelius Webb's office, the pattern of a person with power deciding that a woman without it could be safely rewritten. What are you going to do? Lily asked her that evening. They were sitting on the porch after dinner, the sky going dark from east to west in the way it did out here in great sweeping gradients of purple and indigo. I'm going to keep teaching, Eleanor said. I'm going to keep doing what I'm here to do, and I'm going to let the truth be itself because the truth doesn't need my help to survive. It just needs time. Lily considered this. What if there isn't enough time? Eleanor looked at the darkening sky. Then we make sure the people who matter most hear it clearly enough that it doesn't need to wait. The church social happened on the third Saturday of every month, and the whole of Dry Hollow came because the church social was less a religious event than a community maintenance exercise, the mechanism by which a collection of isolated homesteads reminded itself that it was in fact a community. Victoria Ashford arrived early. She had donated 6 new hymnals and a carved wooden lectern, and she sat in the front with the settled presence of someone who has purchased belonging and considers the transaction complete. Reverend Morrison, who was 70 years old and had been minister of this community since before half of them were born, opened with a prayer. Then he sat down. Victoria stood. She spoke with the polished fluency of a practiced public presenter, beginning with her genuine concern for the welfare of vulnerable families in isolated communities, proceeding through the particular challenges facing a widowed father, raising a young girl, and arriving with the smooth inevitability of a river reaching the sea at her specific concerns regarding the unnamed woman who had come to rest like an inconvenient piece of driftwood in the Harrison household. She produced a letter. From the Philadelphia Ladies Seminary Administration, she said regarding the circumstances of Eleanor's departure. Eleanor felt Cole's shoulder press slightly against hers where they sat side by side, a small intentional contact, the kind of thing you do when you are telling someone something without words. She stood up. The letter is real, she said, because She was a woman who had always found that beginning with the truth was the most efficient approach. It is also incomplete. I left my position in Philadelphia because I refused to continue working under a man who believed his authority extended to my personal life in ways I had not agreed to. When I made this clear, he dismissed me and provided a reference that was accurate in the way that a map with one road missing is accurate. She looked at Victoria. I answered one advertisement, Mr. Whitfield's. I missed my station and arrived in Dry Hollow by accident, and I am still here by choice, which is a different thing. Victoria smiled with the practiced patience of someone who has expected exactly this response and prepared for it. And yet here you are installed in a household, not your own, teaching children without formal arrangement, positioning yourself in a situation that any objective observer would describe as what Mrs. Ashford is describing, Lily said. The church went quiet in the way churches go quiet when a child speaks with unexpected clarity in the middle of adult proceedings. Lily was standing on the pew beside Eleanor, and she was small, and her dress was patched at the hem, and she was the most self-possessed person in the room. Mrs. Ashford has been in Dry Hollow for 2 weeks, Lily said. She has been very generous with money and very careful with information. She has never asked me what I want or what makes me happy or what I need. She has never sat beside me when I was sick or read to me when I couldn't sleep or stayed up because she was worried about me. She looked directly at Victoria. Miss Ellie has done all of those things, and she has done them because she wanted to, not because she was trying to get something. She looked out at the congregation. I know Mrs. Ashford is saying things about Miss Ellie that aren't true. I know because I was there for the things they're about. Miss Ellie came here by accident and stayed because this place needed her, and she needed it, and that's a real reason to stay somewhere. Money is not a real reason. Arrangements are not a real reason. She took a breath. My mama would have liked Miss Ellie very much. I know because I know what Mama liked, and she liked people who were honest and worked hard and weren't afraid of difficulty. Miss Ellie is all of those things. Mrs. Ashford is not any of them. The silence that followed was the kind that happens when a truth has been stated so plainly and completely that there is nothing left to add to it. Samuel Ford stood up. He did not say anything. He simply stood. Tom Bradley stood. Then Mrs. Patterson. Then the Hendersons from the north section and the Bells from the Creek Road, and 4 or 5 others rising in ones and twos, not dramatically, just standing the way people stand when they want to make clear which side of a line they're on. Reverend Morrison remained seated throughout. When the silence had held long enough, he looked at Victoria Ashford with the mild, careful directness of a man who has presided over 7 decades of human behavior and has long since stopped being surprised by any of it. Mrs. Ashford, he said, I have known this community for a long time. I know who has been here through the hard years and who has arrived when the ground seems stable. I know who has built something and who has come to collect it. He folded his hands on the Bible in his lap. I think you would be more comfortable in Santa Fe, and I think with God's grace you'll find something there that suits you better than what's available in Dry Hollow. Victoria stood for a moment in the weighted quiet of the room. Her expression moved through several phases of controlled response, and Eleanor watched the performance of warmth disassemble itself and reveal underneath something colder and sharper. A woman who had genuinely not expected this outcome and was adjusting her understanding of the situation with the rapid, precise recalculation of someone for whom unexpected outcomes are primarily logistical problems. She looked at Eleanor. You think this is finished, she said quietly enough that it was almost private. I think you should go home, Eleanor said, and I think you will because you're too intelligent to stay somewhere you've already lost. Something shifted in Victoria's expression, the faintest movement, not quite respect, but the thing adjacent to it, the acknowledgement that exists between adversaries who have found each other genuinely matched. Then it was gone. She walked out. Aldridge followed. The door of the church closed behind them with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. Ruth Garrett was sitting 3 rows back. Eleanor had not looked at her during the proceedings, but she looked at her now. Ruth's face held something complicated, not the self-righteous certainty of the woman who had walked into the kitchen a week ago, but something more textured, more uncomfortable, the expression of someone who has watched events proceed to a conclusion they had not planned for and is working out what that means about their own prior certainties. She met Eleanor's eyes for a moment. Then she looked at Lily, who was still standing on the pew, and something in Ruth's expression softened, like a knot worked loose by patient pressure. She didn't speak, but she didn't look away either. They walked home through the blue evening, all three of them, with Samuel Ford riding alongside for the first mile, saying very little, which was his habitual mode of strong approval. Lily walked between Eleanor and Cole and held a hand of each with the matter-of-fact confidence of someone who has concluded that this is the correct arrangement and sees no reason to be self-conscious about it. "Are you tired?" Cole asked her. "No," she said. "I'm the opposite of tired. I don't know what the word for that is." "Awake," Eleanor suggested. "More than awake. More awake than normal awake." "Alive," Cole said. Lily considered this. "Yes," she said. "That one." At the ranch, she went to bed without much protest, which was itself a measure of how much the day had taken even from someone who ran on what appeared to be an essentially inexhaustible source of energy. Eleanor sat with her until her breathing steadied, and when she came back to the main room, Cole was on the porch with 2 cups of coffee, and she took one and stood beside him and looked at the night. The stars out here were something she had not been prepared for. In Philadelphia, the sky at night was a dark ceiling with a few holes in it. Out here, it was a genuine depth layer behind layer, the kind of thing that made you feel both very small and paradoxically very located, as though the universe was large enough to hold you specifically and had arranged the evidence accordingly. "She'll try again," Cole said. "She won't." He looked at her. "She's spent and she knows it," Eleanor said. "She was counting on the community. She bought it and it didn't stay bought, and a woman like that understands losses. She'll cut hers and go." He was quiet for a moment. "How do you know people that well?" "I taught young women for 6 years. You learn to tell the difference between someone who's angry and someone who's recalculating." She drank her coffee. "She's recalculating. She'll be gone by Thursday." That same night in her room at the boarding house, Victoria Ashford sat at the small writing desk and looked at the wall for a long time. The room smelled of her perfume and the cold air coming through the window she had left cracked because she did not sleep well in rooms that were completely sealed. Aldridge had already sent word from the hotel across the road the discharge document was legitimate, the debt purchase void, and the county sheriff had made preliminary inquiries to his counterpart in Santa Fe about her other land transactions. She did not feel angry. Anger was for people who had not accounted for the possibility of failure. She felt instead the clean, impersonal clarity of a woman who has assessed a situation and concluded that the returns no longer justify the investment. She would leave in the morning. She had other properties, other opportunities, other men with debt problems, and not enough sense to see what was being done to them until it was finished. Dry Hollow was not a loss. It was simply not a win, and there was a difference. She packed methodically, folded her traveling suit, and went to bed without further consideration. She had learned over a life spent acquiring things that the only true waste was the time spent mourning what had never been hers to begin with. Victoria Ashford was gone by Wednesday. The following morning, a rider came up the track, and Eleanor, watching from the kitchen window, recognized the weary, dust-covered shape of a man who had been traveling for a long time. She did not recognize him. She went to the door. He was perhaps 52 years old, lean and weathered, with the eyes of someone who had thought carefully about what he was going to say and had decided to say it simply. "Miss Cross," he said, "my name is James Whitfield." She looked at him for a moment without speaking. "I received your telegram," he said. "I didn't come to change your mind. I can see from here that your mind is correct." His eyes moved briefly to the ranch house, to the barn, to Cole, who had appeared in the barn doorway. "I came because Ruth Garrett wrote to a woman in Pine Ridge she corresponds with regularly, and that woman is my neighbor's wife in Neighbors Talk. I heard your name connected to the Harrison Ranch and a debt being used as a weapon, and I knew then what I was carrying in my saddlebag and why I had been asked to carry it all those years ago, and because I have something in my saddlebag that I think belongs to this family." He reached into the bag at his side and produced a document folded and worn at the creases, the paper slightly yellowed with age. "Walter Carey was Grace Harrison's father," he said. "We did cattle business together for 15 years. 6 weeks before he died, he called me to his office, and he signed this in front of me and asked me to keep it. He said if anyone ever comes after that ranch using the loan as leverage, you bring this out. It's a full discharge of the lien. Signed, witnessed, and legal. He held it out. I didn't know it would be needed this soon. I'm sorry I wasn't faster. Eleanor took the document with both hands. She carried it inside to where Cole was now standing by the table, and she laid it flat before him, and she watched him read it once, and then again more slowly, his hands pressed flat on the table on either side of it. When he looked up, his expression was the expression of a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just been told he can set it down. The lien was already discharged, Eleanor said. Victoria bought a debt that no longer existed. Cole looked at the document for another long moment. Then he looked at Eleanor. There was something in his face that she had not seen before or had seen only in fragments, in the evening quiet of the porch, in the kitchen, in the small daily moments that accumulate without announcement into something that can no longer be mistaken for something smaller than it is. I think I need to say something to you, he said. All right. I wrote a letter once. You may have seen part of it. I may have. I meant every word of it, but I wrote it thinking it would probably never be sent, that it was the kind of thing a person writes to clarify themselves, to themselves, and then sets aside because the world doesn't often provide what people write letters about. He looked at the document under his hands and then at her. I would like to ask you something. She waited. Would you stay, he said. Not because of Lily, though Lily needs you. Not because of the ranch, though God knows it does too, but because I would like you to be here. Because when you're here, this house is itself again, in a way it hasn't been in 2 years. Because when you laugh, my daughter laughs, and when you cook, I remember what eating is for, and when you sing, He stopped, tried again. Because I am falling in love with you, Eleanor Cross, and I would like the chance to do it properly, slowly, with your full knowledge and your honest consent. Lily appeared in the doorway behind him, having arrived by some mechanism Eleanor could never quite account for at the exact moment the moment required her. She's going to say yes, Papa, Lily said. She decided this morning. I could tell at breakfast. Cole looked at his daughter. Lily. Well, it's true. She held her coffee cup with both hands and looked at the mountain and smiled, and that's what she does when she's decided something that makes her happy. Eleanor looked at Cole, then she looked at Lily. Then she looked at the document on the table, which had traveled from a dead man's office through 15 years, in a saddlebag, in a stranger's good faith, to land here on this table in this kitchen on this particular morning, like something that had always known where it was going. Yes, she said, I'll stay. Lily made a sound that was equal parts triumph and relief, the sound of someone whose faith in a particular outcome has been confirmed after a long wait. Cole exhaled slowly as though he had been holding his breath for 2 years. Outside, a horse moved in the corral. Somewhere in the distance, thunder spoke quietly in the mountains. The morning held itself open around them, patient as land-wide, as sky, full of the particular promise of things that are not finished, but have at last honestly and without reservation begun. October came to New Mexico territory the way it always did, without apology and without announcement. One morning, simply different from the morning before it, the light changed at its edges, cooler, more considered, the way a man looks when he has been thinking something over and has finally arrived at a conclusion he is prepared to live with. The cottonwoods along the creek road went gold so completely that Lily stood at the kitchen window for 10 minutes one morning without speaking, which was, Eleanor had come to understand, the highest form of appreciation the child was capable of expressing. When she finally turned around, her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with sadness. Mama used to say that October was God showing off, she said. I think your mother was right, Eleanor said. Lily considered this with the careful nodding gravity she brought to all serious matters. She was right about most things, she said. It took Papa a while to figure that out, but he got there. Cole, who was at the table reading a cattle report, did not look up. I'm right here, Lily. I know, she said pleasantly, and went back to watching the cottonwoods. The days had arranged themselves into a shape that felt to Eleanor less like something she was constructing and more like something she was discovering, the way you discover a room in a house you thought you knew completely, finding it behind a door you had always taken for a wall. She woke each morning to the light coming through Grace's window, the same light, the same angle, but receiving it differently now, with the specific quality of attention that comes when a person has decided to be where they are, rather than simply found themselves there. She taught 6 mornings a week. The school had grown to 8 children, ranging from 6 to 13, each of them distinct and various and wonderful in the specific way children are wonderful when someone is genuinely paying attention to them rather than processing them through an institutional framework. She had written back to Caroline in Philadelphia with the second installment of curriculum materials, and Carolyn had written back that the school board wanted more, and the quarterly payments had become something Eleanor was beginning to build plans around. Careful plans, the kind you make when you believe in the future they depend on. Cole had accepted her contribution to Ford's loan without the prolonged resistance she had expected, which told her something about how he was changing, or rather how he was returning to something he had been before grief had narrowed him. He still expressed approval primarily through action rather than speech through the fence. He repaired on the east boundary of what he had quietly begun referring to as the school's outdoor space through the 2 new shelves he built in the kitchen, without being asked, through the way he always had coffee, ready before she came out in the morning, set at the edge of the stove where it would stay warm without burning. These were his words. She had learned to read them. She also noticed that he had stopped going silent on Sunday evenings. For the first year after Grace died, Lily had told her he would sit at the kitchen table on Sunday nights and write. And when Lily had once asked him who he was writing to, he had said, no one in particular, and Lily had understood without being told that this was not quite true. Eleanor had seen the letters in the desk drawer folded and unaddressed, accumulating like layers of sediment. He had not written one since the night of the church social. She did not mention this. He did not mention it. The drawer stayed closed, and the Sunday evenings had a different quality. The quality of a room where a window has been opened after a long time, the air moving differently, carrying things in rather than holding them trapped. James Whitfield stayed in Dry Hollow for 3 days after delivering the discharge document. He was a quiet, self-contained man. Not unhappy, Eleanor thought, but not quite content either, in the way of someone who has built a life they respect, but has not yet found the thing that makes respecting it feel like enough. She talked with him on the porch one evening, while Cole was still in the barn, and Lily had been persuaded after extended negotiation that sleep was a reasonable way to spend the hours between 9 and 6. You don't regret it, Whitfield said. It was not quite a question. Not for a moment. He looked at the mountains, which at this hour were a deep layered purple, and he was quiet for a while. Then he said, when I placed that advertisement, I told myself I was being practical. A man needs a partner to run a ranch, and sentiment is a luxury for people who don't have cattle to move and accounts to keep. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. I think I was lying to myself. I think what I wanted was what you have here. I just didn't know how to say so. You could still say so, Eleanor said, to the right person. He looked at her with a slight wry expression. At 52. Love doesn't consult a calendar, she said. I didn't think I was going to find this either. I got on a train to a practical arrangement and ended up somewhere else entirely. He considered this. Then his eyes moved briefly and with a quality she recognized toward the far end of the porch where Amy Ford Samuel's daughter had come to drop off a basket of preserves from her father and had stayed as she sometimes did to talk with Lily about the garden. Amy was 28 years old, a widow of 3 years, a woman with a quiet, self-possessed manner and a quality of stillness that Eleanor had always found compelling. She said nothing. She only watched Whitfield, not quite looking at Amy Ford, and then deciding to look after all, and she thought about the inexhaustible, quietly methodical way that the world arranges things when people are honest enough to let it. Ruth Garrett came by twice a week through October, and the nature of her visits shifted in ways that were not dramatic and were therefore more complete than drama would have been. She no longer announced her presence with the authority of someone conducting an inspection. She knocked. She drank tea at the kitchen table. She watched Eleanor teach Lily to embroider using Grace's patterns, the ones Eleanor had found in the sewing basket in Grace's room, and she sat in the chair by the window without speaking for a long time. And Eleanor did not try to fill the silence because she understood that some silences are doing important work that conversation would interrupt. One afternoon, Ruth picked up one of the pattern pieces and turned it in her hands. Grace made this one the year Lily was born, she said. She sent me a photograph of it. I thought it was too complicated for a beginner, but she said the complicated ones were worth the time because they lasted. She was right, Eleanor said. Ruth set the pattern down with a care that was itself a kind of statement. I sent for Victoria, she said. I want you to know I understand what that was. Ruth, I was afraid, she said. That is the whole of it. I was afraid of losing what I still had, which was being necessary to Cole and Lily, and I could not see that protecting that at their expense was not love. She looked at Eleanor directly. Grace would have been disappointed in me. That matters more to me than most things. Eleanor reached across the table and covered the woman's hand briefly with her own. Ruth stiffened slightly, then didn't, which was Eleanor had come to understand the closest Ruth Garrett came to returning an embrace. She would have been proud of you for saying it, Eleanor said. Ruth withdrew her hand, picked up her tea, and looked out the window at the changing leaves. The wedding should be in the church, she said in the tone of someone offering practical assistance rather than making a peace offering, because peace offerings required an acknowledgement of prior hostility that Ruth was not yet ready to formalize. Reverend Morrison will want at least 3 weeks' notice, and Lily will need a proper dress. Eleanor looked at her for a moment. Then she said, I was thinking yellow for Lily. She lights up in yellow. Ruth nodded. And she agreed, and something in the agreement felt like a door opening. Not wide, not yet, but open with light coming through. He came to her on a Tuesday evening in the second week of November with his hat in his hand and something small wrapped in a piece of cloth. He set it on the table between them without ceremony. Inside was a ring, plain silver, with a small turquoise stone, the color of the New Mexico sky in October. A jeweler came through from Albuquerque, he said. I told him what I was looking for. He said turquoise is the stone of this land. He paused. I thought that was right, for a woman who came here by accident and made it hers. She looked at the ring for a long moment. Then she looked at him. He slid it onto her finger with the careful, focused attention he brought to everything that mattered. And the fit was exactly right, which seemed on that particular evening like the least surprising thing in the world. He looked at her over the ring. Will you marry me? He said. Not a performance, not a speech, just the words said plainly by a man who had decided to mean them. She said yes, the way she had always answered true things directly without hesitation, because she had known the answer for some time and saw no benefit in making either of them wait for what was already certain. He put his arm around her on the bench, and they sat together in the cold and the stars, and she thought about the Philadelphia train platform and the telegram in her bag and the 3 days that had changed the direction of everything, and she felt something she could only describe as gratitude, of a particular kind, the kind that has been tested and refined into something more durable than its original form. From inside the house, barely audible, came the sound of small feet on the hallway floor, and then the careful, suspicious quiet of a child who has been listening at a door and has heard enough to be entirely satisfied with what she has heard. Neither of them mentioned it. The dress took 3 weeks. Eleanor sewed it herself from ivory wool that Mr. Patterson had ordered from Santa Fe, working in the evenings by lamplight, with the patience of someone making something they intend to last. Ruth came twice to help with the fitting, bringing with her a quiet competence that Eleanor had always suspected existed beneath the armor, now that the armor had reasons to be set aside. The stitching was careful and the lines were clean, and the dress was, when finished, the kind of garment that does not announce itself but is impossible to overlook. The week before the wedding, Eleanor found something unexpected. She had been organizing Grace's sewing room. Not clearing it, there was a difference, tidying it with the respect of someone caring for a space that belongs in a particular way to people who are still present in it. In the small cedar chest beneath the window, she found wrapped in a piece of muslin, a hair comb of polished silver, set with small blue stones that caught the light in a way that suggested each one had been chosen individually with care. She brought it to Cole that evening. He looked at it for a long time without speaking, with the expression of someone whose memory has just been handed something from itself. Grace wore it at our wedding, he said finally. Her mother gave it to her. She said something blue is for the future, not the past, because blue is the color of what's still ahead. He looked at Eleanor. I'd like you to have it, if you want it. Eleanor held the comb gently. Are you sure? He nodded. Grace would have given it to you herself. I know that with more certainty than I know most things. He reached into his vest pocket and set something else on the table beside the comb. It was a key, not the iron room key he had given her the first night, but a smaller one, brass, slightly worn. Rack in the back of the closet, he said. Grace's rifle. I'd like you to know where it is and how to use it in case I'm ever not here. He did not say more than that. He did not need to. Lily appeared in the doorway with the timing she had perfected over the preceding months, the ability to arrive at moments of consequence as though she had been scheduled. She looked at the comb and then at Eleanor, and then at her father, and then back at the comb. Blue is for the future, she said because she had been closer to the door than either of them had realized and had heard everything and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. Lily, Cole said. It's a good reason, she said. I'm just agreeing. December the 24th arrived on a Thursday that smelled of Pinot smoke and cold air, and the particular quality of anticipation that comes on certain days in a life, the days that feel different from inside even before anything has happened in them. The snow came at 3 in the morning light and dry a dusting that covered the ground in white, without disrupting the roads, and Lily stood at the kitchen window in her nightgown before dawn, and watched it fall and declared it a miracle with the simple certainty of someone stating a fact that admits no reasonable dispute. It doesn't snow here on Christmas Eve, she told Eleanor. It's snowing now, Eleanor pointed out. That's what makes it a miracle, Lily said patiently. The church was full by 9:30, which was itself a small miracle of a different kind given the distances people had traveled through the cold. The building glowed from inside with candles along every sill and lengths of juniper bough tied at the ends of every pew, their sharp green scent mixing with the smell of candle wax and wood smoke, and the particular warmth of many people gathered in one room on a cold morning for a reason that pleased them. Eleanor dressed in Grace's sewing room, which had become by quiet and mutual agreement, her room now the room that kept its history and had added to it. Ruth helped her with the buttons at the back of the ivory dress. Neither of them spoke much, which was how things tended to work best between them, the communication happening in the practiced economy of two women sharing a task in the way Ruth straightened a fold without being asked, and Eleanor held still for the adjustment without commenting on the need for it. When Eleanor put Grace's comb in her hair, Ruth stood behind her for a moment and was quiet in a particular way. It suits you, Ruth said finally. Thank you, Eleanor said. A pause. It suits you better than I expected, Ruth said, which was from Ruth Garrett. An extraordinary statement, and they both understood it as such, and Eleanor looked at her in the mirror, and Ruth looked back, and something passed between them that did not require any more words than it already had. Samuel Ford was waiting at the back of the church. He was wearing what was clearly his good suit pressed to the frontier standard of pressed, which meant the worst wrinkles had been persuaded out of it. He had his hat in his hands and the expression of a man who has agreed to do something he considers important and is not going to embarrass himself by showing how much it matters to him. Someone has to walk her in, he had said 3 days prior to Cole in the barn, in a tone that suggested this was a logistical observation rather than an offer because Ford had never in his life made an offer that revealed how much he wanted to make it. Might as well be me. I've got nothing else that morning. He offered her his arm now, without ceremony or comment. She took it. Lily went first in her yellow dress, carrying a small basket of dried rose petals she had gathered herself from the bunchgrass roses along the creek before the first frost drying them on the kitchen windowsill for exactly this purpose. With the forward-planning patience of someone who had known for some time how this particular morning was going to go, she walked with the focused concentration of someone executing an important responsibility, placing each petal with deliberate care, pausing occasionally to make sure the distribution was satisfying. Eleanor walked behind her. Cole was at the front of the church. She had seen him every day for 3 months. She knew the particular way he moved, knew the quality of his silences, and the careful economy of his speech, knew how he looked in the barn at first light, and how he looked at the end of a long day, and how he looked at Lily when he thought no one was watching. But she had not seen him look like this. He was wearing a dark vest over his best shirt, and he had his hat in his hands rather than on his head, and he was watching her come toward him with an expression that was for once entirely without armor. Nothing held back, nothing managed, just the plain and undefended truth of a man who is looking at what he loves and is not going to pretend otherwise. She felt the church and the candles and the congregation become peripheral the way everything becomes peripheral when the essential thing is directly in front of you. Ford placed her hand in Cole's and stepped back. Reverend Morrison looked at them both over his Bible with the expression of a man who has performed this ceremony many times and has learned to tell the difference between the ones that are formalities and the ones that are genuine, and who is in this case in no doubt about which category he is presiding over. Eleanor, Cole said when the moment came for vows. He had written his himself, she knew, in the evenings after Lily was asleep, and he had not shown them to her, and she had not asked. You came to this place by accident. You stayed by choice. Those two things together are the whole story, and I think the whole story is the best one I've ever been part of. He held her hands in both of his, the calluses she knew well by now, the particular warmth of them. I promise to give you partnership in everything. Not just the work, but the deciding, not just the difficulty, but the credit, not just the years, but the days inside them, the ordinary days that are what a life is actually made of. He paused. I promise to keep earning your choice every day. Not to take it as settled, but to be worth it. Because you chose this when you could have gone somewhere else, and I don't intend to ever forget what it cost you to choose it or how much it means that you did. Eleanor had not planned to cry. She had told herself quite firmly in the 3 weeks of preparation that she was a practical woman and that crying during one's own wedding vows was sentimental excess. She was revising this position. She took a breath and said, Cole, you were the first person in longer than I can remember who gave me room to be exactly what I am without requiring me to be something smaller or more convenient. You gave me space to teach and build and contribute, not as a favor, but because you understood that those things were not separate from who I am, but were who I am. She looked at him directly because she had always found directness more honest than any alternative. I promise to be your true partner. Not a helpmate, not a support, but an equal standing next to you in everything this life brings. I promise to love Lily with everything I have not, instead of loving you, but as part of the same love, because they are not separate things. And I promise to make this house. She glanced briefly at the half-finished embroidery she had by now completed and hung on the wall the specific gesture of which they were both aware, a place where the past is honored and the future is welcomed, and the people inside it always know they belong. Lily, from her position beside Eleanor, said with great seriousness, I promise to do my chores without being reminded more than twice, and to only interrupt when it is truly important, and to not tell Papa things he already knows as if he doesn't know them. The congregation laughed, the warm and genuine laughter of people who have been holding something delightful and have just been given permission to release it. Cole looked at his daughter with an expression Eleanor had come to love, especially the one where the corners of his eyes creased, and his whole face reorganized itself around something other than the careful management of feeling the expression that meant Lily had once again said the exact true thing in the exact right way. Reverend Morrison, who had been waiting with the patience of a man who has long since made his peace with the fact that the most important weddings are never entirely his to direct, said, by the power vested in me by the territory of New Mexico, and by God above, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Cole kissed her in the particular way of a man who does not make gestures. He doesn't mean and means every gesture he makes briefly and completely, and the congregation applauded with the enthusiasm of people who have been through difficulty together and are glad to be celebrating something. The reception was held in the church hall. Every family had brought food and the tables were heavy with it, and the fiddle player from the Henderson place played from the corner with the focused energy of someone who takes dancing seriously, and Lily danced with everyone who would partner her, and several who initially declined but were persuaded. James Whitfield stood near the refreshment table for most of the first hour, and Amy Ford stood nearby, and by the end of the second hour they were talking with the careful exploratory attention of two people who are discovering that another person is considerably more interesting than the room they are standing in. Eleanor observed this from across the hall and said nothing about it to anyone, but she felt something that was warm and satisfied and not at all surprised. She danced with Cole once slowly to a tune the fiddle player had shifted into something old and unhurried, and Cole was not, as Lily had correctly identified, a natural dancer, but he was a man who committed to what he decided to do, and he held her with the steady present attention he brought to everything that mattered to him, and she thought, this is what I came here for. Not this specifically, not this moment, as I could not have predicted it, but this quality of thing, this realness. They rode home in the late afternoon, the three of them, with the snow still light on the ground and the sky going the deep saturated blue. It goes in the high desert when the cold comes in properly. Lily fell asleep between them on the wagon bench before they reached the ranch gate, her head dropping to Eleanor's shoulder with the absolute trust of a child who has no doubt about the safety of where she is. Cole reached across his sleeping daughter and found Eleanor's hand in the half-dark. She let the feeling of it move through her without trying to hold it still. because she had learned that the best things do not need to be held still. They are already settled and already rooted, already the kind of real that does not require the effort of being maintained. Winter deepened. The ranch settled into the rhythms of the cold months, the shorter days and longer evenings, the particular intimacy of a household that has made its peace with limited space and discovered that limited space when it contains the right people is not a limitation at all. Eleanor continued to teach. She continued to write curriculum materials, and the payments from the Boston School Board became a reliable quarterly addition to the ranch's finances. And she and Cole sat together over the accounts in the evenings, and she watched him adjust to the experience of financial partnership with the gradual ease of a man who had always done everything alone, discovering that some things are better done together without giving up any essential part of himself. Ruth came every week without fail. She and Eleanor did not become the kind of friends who confided everything to one another because they were both too private for that and too honest to perform an intimacy they hadn't earned. But they became the kind of women who work well together and trust each other's judgment and occasionally say things to one another that they would not say to anyone else, which is in its own way a deeper thing than friendship. One evening in late January, Ruth stayed past dark and Eleanor made tea, and they sat at the kitchen table while Cole worked in the barn and Lily slept, and Ruth said without particular preamble, "I wrote to Victoria after everything. I told her that I had been foolish and that she had used my foolishness and that I did not hold her entirely responsible because the responsibility was shared, but that I wanted her to know I understood the difference between what I had been trying to do and what I had allowed to happen." Eleanor looked at her tea. "She did not respond," Ruth said. "I didn't expect her to. It wasn't a letter that required a response. It was a letter that required writing." "Yes," Eleanor said. "I think that's right." Ruth drank her tea. "Grace would have written that letter herself," she said. "She always said that the things you leave unaddressed are the things that cost you the most in the end." She was right about that, too. "She was right about a great deal," Eleanor said. "Yes." Ruth set down her cup. "She chose well," she added in a tone that communicated without stating that she was referring to more than one choice. Then she put on her coat and went home. The envelope arrived in the second week of March while the first warm edge was beginning to come into the air. Not spring yet, but the announcement of spring, the subtle shift that precedes it. It was addressed to Lily Harrison, care of the Harrison Ranch, Dry Hollow, New Mexico territory. The return address was from a law firm in Santa Fe. Cole brought it to the kitchen table and set it down, and they looked at it together for a moment before Lily, who had been doing arithmetic at the end of the table, noticed and came to stand beside them. "It has my name on it," she said. "It does." Cole agreed. Am I in trouble? "I don't believe so." Lily opened it with the focused care of someone who understands that certain letters deserve to be opened carefully. Inside was a legal document from the office of Morrison and Webb attorneys at Law Santa Fe, and a letter written by hand on pale gray paper. Ruth Garrett had died in Santa Fe on the 15th of February, 1889. Heart, the doctor had said, sudden. She had been staying with a friend there after the Christmas season and had not suffered and had been at peace, the friend had written to Cole separately. She had been gone 3 weeks before the letter reached Dry Hollow, traveling the slow roads of the territory. The legal document stated that the entirety of Ruth Garrett's estate, which was not inconsiderable, her late husband having been a careful man, was left in trust to Lily Marie Harrison to be managed by her father until her majority, and used thereafter as she saw fit for her education and independence. Lily read the letter 3 times. Then she set it down on the table and was quiet for a long time, and the quality of her quiet was different from her ordinary quiet, deeper and more considered, the quiet of someone who is doing something important inside themselves. "Read the letter, Papa," she said. Cole picked it up. He read it aloud slowly in the careful voice he used for things that deserved care. The letter was in Ruth's hand, the same strong, forward-leaning script that Eleanor had seen in the notes Ruth left on the kitchen table. But softer than usual, the pen pressed less firmly, as though the writer had been holding something she was not accustomed to holding. "Lily, I was wrong about many things. I was wrong about the woman your father chose. I was wrong to believe that love could be organized by competence and proper arrangement rather than by the things that cannot be planned for. Your mother knew this. She tried to teach it to me for 20 years, and I was not a good student. Your Miss Ellie knew it from the beginning, which is perhaps why she frightened me. When someone has what you have been trying to find, their presence is a kind of accusation even when they mean no accusation at all. I want you to know that I am glad. That is perhaps the strangest and most honest thing I have ever written. I am glad that your father has what he has. I am glad that you have what you have. I am glad in the particular and complicated way that I am capable of gladness that I was wrong. Use this money to learn everything you wish to learn. Use it to go wherever the learning requires. Use it to become every version of yourself that you can be. That is what your mother would have wanted for you. And it is, I find, at this particular stage of my life, what I want for you too. With love in my way, Ruth. The kitchen held the letter and its contents for a long time. Lily said she was glad. Yes, Eleanor said. She figured it out. Before it was too late, Cole said quietly. Lily picked up the letter and held it carefully as though it might be fragile now that it had been read, and looked at it with the expression of someone adding something important to their understanding of the world. I think she was brave, she said. To write that, it's easy to be right about things after they happen. It's hard to say so. Eleanor looked at Cole over Lily's head. He was watching his daughter with the expression he reserved for the moments when she surprised him, which she did regularly, and the surprise never diminished. And Eleanor thought that this was one of the things she loved most about him, his consistent capacity to be moved by the child he had made, the way he never let familiarity dull his attention to her. He looked up and met Eleanor's eyes. Something passed between them that did not require language. The spring came on properly in April, the garden coming back with the particular determination of things that have been waiting all winter for permission to return, and Eleanor and Lily planted the new seeds together on a warm Saturday morning, while Cole worked the near field, his figure moving against the greening distance in the steady, purposeful way that she realized, been watching without quite registering for months, the way you watch something you have come to love without needing to make a ceremony of it. She became aware of the change in her body in the second week of April, not all at once, but gradually, the way awareness arrives when it has been true for a while before you acknowledge it. The nausea with the coffee in the mornings. The way certain smells that she had always welcomed had become suddenly problematic. The specific quality of exhaustion that was different from ordinary tiredness, deeper and more purposeful. The tiredness of a body doing something important. She waited another week to be certain. Then she went to see Dr. Miller in town, and Dr. Miller, a small, precise man of 60, who had delivered 4 generations of Dry Hollow residents and had long since achieved the physician's particular serenity in the face of the whole range of human experience, confirmed what she had suspected. With the calm satisfaction of someone reporting good news he considers routine. A Christmas baby, he said, or thereabouts. You're healthy, everything looks right. She drove home with the sun warm on her face and the knowledge settling into her, the way things settle when they are exactly the right size for the space they're filling. She waited until dinner. She wanted to tell them both at the same time, and she wanted the table between them, the table where they had eaten the first meal she had ever cooked in this house, the table that had become the center of something she had not known she was building until it was built. She waited until Lily had finished her second biscuit and Cole had poured his second cup of coffee, and then she set down her own cup and said, I have something to tell you both. Cole looked at her. He had learned in the months since October to read the particular quality of her serious voice, and he was already very still. Lily looked up with the sharp alertness of a child whose internal antenna for significant announcements had just fired. We're going to have a baby, Eleanor said, around Christmas. The silence lasted approximately 2 seconds. Then Lily made a sound that began as a gasp and became immediately a declaration. I prayed for this. Cole set down his cup with great deliberateness. He looked at Eleanor with an expression she had not seen before, something new, something being added to the catalog of his faces that she had been quietly compiling and would now expand to include this one, which was the expression of a man receiving a gift he had not allowed himself to want. When he said, his voice slightly different from its usual register, lower and more careful. Dr. Miller says Christmas. Give or take a week. I prayed for this, Lily repeated with the emphasis of someone whose original statement has not been adequately acknowledged. I have been praying for this since before Miss Ellie was even here. I asked for a brother or a sister, and I specified that sooner was better than later, and I prayed very specifically and clearly, and God answered. You prayed for a baby before I even arrived, Eleanor said. I prayed for a lot of things before you arrived, Lily said. Some of them came true faster than the others. Cole reached across the table and took Eleanor's hand, and his hand was warm and steady and entirely present. And he looked at her with the particular look he had that was not quite a smile, but contained everything a smile could carry, and more, and he said quietly, "This is good." "Yes," she said, "it is." Lily slid off her chair and came around the table and inserted herself between them with the complete absence of self-consciousness of someone who has never once doubted her right to be exactly where she is. And she put one arm around Eleanor and one arm around Cole, and she said with great satisfaction, "Now we are a complete family." Cole looked at Eleanor over the top of Lily's head. Eleanor looked back at him. "We were already a family," Eleanor said, looking down at Lily. "We just got a new addition on the way." "A complete family has a baby," Lily said firmly. "Everyone knows that." Cole made a sound that was undeniably a laugh, brief and quiet and real, the kind that comes from something genuinely delighted rather than performed, and Lily looked up at him with the satisfied expression of someone who has produced the desired result. The summer passed, the school grew, the ranch prospered slowly and honestly, the way ranches prosper when the people running them are both capable and paying attention. Eleanor taught in the mornings and worked in the afternoons and grew larger with the particular uncomplicated dignity of a woman who is comfortable in her body and uninterested in performing discomfort for the benefit of people who expect it. Cole built a cradle in the barn over 3 weeks in August, working in the evenings after the day's labor, and he did not tell her what he was building until it was finished, when he carried it into the house and set it beside the bedroom window and stood back and looked at it with the critical, satisfied expression of a craftsman reviewing completed work. It was simple and solid, made of juniper, and it had a small carved detail on the headboard that she looked at for a moment before she understood what she was seeing: a rose. A single climbing rose, the kind that grows along the creek in summer, persistent and surprising, and not where you would expect to find it. She did not say anything. She put her hand on the carved rose and felt the slight warmth of the wood, and Cole stood beside her, and they were quiet together in the particular way they had refined over the months into something that was entirely their own. The first hard labor came on the morning of the 23rd of December. Cole went for Dr. Miller, while Eleanor stayed at the house with Mrs. Bradley, who had come at first light when word reached the neighboring ranch, and who proved in the hours that followed to be exactly the kind of woman you want beside you in a difficult situation: calm and capable, and entirely focused on the task without making the task about herself. Lily, who had been told firmly by both Cole and Eleanor that she was to remain in the kitchen, remained in the kitchen for approximately 40 minutes before appearing in the doorway with the expression of someone who has weighed the instructions against the circumstances and found the instructions wanting. "I'll be quiet," she said. "I won't be in the way. I just need to be able to hear." Mrs. Bradley looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked at Lily. "Stay by the door," she said. The baby came at 11:45 on the night of December the 23rd, which made him by 15 minutes a child born in the final hour before Christmas Eve, which Lily immediately ruled was close enough to Christmas Eve to count a position she maintained for the rest of her life without opposition. He was a boy, solid and loud and healthy, with a quantity of dark hair that Dr. Miller said was unusual, and Eleanor said was exactly right. Cole sat on the edge of the bed and held the child with the careful, overwhelmed attention of a man who has been through this before and knows what it means and is not any less moved for the knowledge. He did not say anything for a long time. He only held his son and looked at Eleanor with the expression that she had learned these past months was the real one, the one underneath all the careful management, the one that was simply what was true. "Henry," she said, "if you agree." "Henry," he said. "Henry Grace Harrison," Lily said from the doorway, because she had been quietly composing the full name for the past 3 hours and was ready to present it. "Henry for Eleanor's father. Grace for Mama. Harrison because that's us." Cole looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he looked at Eleanor. Then he looked at the small, warm, insistent weight of his son in his arms. "Henry Grace Harrison," he said. "Yes." Samuel Ford was standing near the doorway, hat in both hands, and Eleanor saw him look at the baby for a long moment, with an expression she had not seen on his face before, open and unguarded, the face underneath the face he usually wore. And then he cleared his throat and said in his practical way, "I'll see to the horses." and went out, and Eleanor loved him in that moment for the completeness of the gesture, for the way it was both a concealment and a kindness. Lily came to sit on the edge of the bed near enough to see, but careful not to crowd, and she looked at Henry with the absorbed, considering attention of someone who was accounting for something new in a world they thought they understood. "He's small," she said. "He'll grow," Cole said. "He looks like Papa." "He has my nose," Eleanor said. Lily studied Henry with the impartial thoroughness of a fair judge. "He has both," she decided, "which is good. Papa's nose is better, but yours is more interesting." Cole made the sound again, the brief, quiet, real laugh. Eleanor felt it move through the room like warmth from a fire, the kind that reaches you even from the far side of the room. Christmas Eve came on a clear, cold morning. The sky, the hard, bright blue of the high desert in winter. The mountains crisp at their edges, as though drawn with particular care. There had been more snow overnight, an inch or two over the existing cover, and the ranch was white and quiet and very still. They went to the church in the morning. All four of them, Cole carrying Henry, in the blankets Ruth had sent from Santa Fe, the winter before the blue wool ones, soft as anything the color of the future Grace's mother had believed in. Lily walked between Cole and Eleanor and held a hand of each, as she always did when all three of them were walking together, because it was the right arrangement, and she had understood this from the beginning. Samuel Ford was at the church door, as he always was, standing with the self-contained patience of a man who arrives early everywhere because he takes things seriously. He looked at Henry in Cole's arms with the careful assessing look of someone inspecting new livestock for quality, and then nodded once with what was from Samuel Ford an expression of high approbation. "Healthy boy," he said. "Named for you," Cole told him. Ford looked at him. "For my given name, Henry," Cole confirmed. "And Grace, Henry Grace Harrison." Ford was quiet for a moment. He looked at Eleanor. He looked at the baby. He looked briefly at the middle distance, at something only he could see. "Well," he said, and cleared his throat, and turned toward the church door, and the slight roughness in his voice as he said it was the most eloquent thing Eleanor had heard him say in all the months she had known him. Amy Ford was inside in the third pew, and James Whitfield was sitting beside her, which was, Eleanor noted without surprise, 3 rows closer together than they had been at the September social, and the particular way they were sitting, not touching, not performing, just present with each other in a way that suggested they had already made certain private determinations, told her something she was glad to know. She caught Amy's eye across the church, and Amy smiled the smile of a woman who is happy and is comfortable letting it show, and Eleanor smiled back the same way. The service was the Christmas Eve service that Reverend Morrison had performed for 37 consecutive years, and it was the same in its structure and its readings and its hymns, but it was different this year in the quality of attention people brought to it. Eleanor thought the specific gravity of a community that has been through something and has come out together on the other side. The Harrison story was their story in some way, the way stories become shared property when a community has been present for them. And there was a warmth in the church that she felt was not only the bodies and the candles, but something more distributed, the warmth of people who are glad about something real. They sang Silent Night at the end, as they always did, and Eleanor sang with the congregation, her soprano voice finding its natural place in the weave of voices around her, and Cole, standing beside her with Henry asleep against his chest, did not sing but stood very still in the way he went, still when something mattered to him, and he wanted to receive it fully rather than respond to it immediately. Lily sang. She knew every word, and she sang them with the total commitment of someone for whom the meaning of the words and the experience of singing them were not 2 separate things but one. Walking home, the 4 of them in the cold and the late morning light, with the snow quiet underfoot, and the mountains sharp against the blue sky, and Henry asleep and undisturbed through all of it, Eleanor thought about the platform at Dry Hollow Station, the August heat, and the empty track, and the 2 leather cases at her feet, and she thought about the sound of small footsteps running, and a voice saying she finally came, and she thought about the particular mercy of mistakes that turn out not to be mistakes at all. She did not think of it as luck. Luck was what happened to you. This was something she had been part of making, and all of them had, through the small daily acts of choosing and showing up and being honest and staying the accumulated weight of ordinary days that were not ordinary at all, but were, when you looked at them honestly, the whole substance of a life. Cole's hand found hers as they walked. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Lily walked ahead of them in the snow. her yellow dress visible under her winter coat, her boots making small, precise tracks that would fill in by afternoon, and she turned once and looked back at the three of them with the expression she wore when she was checking that everything was as it should be and found that it was and turned back toward the house. The house was ahead and the smoke was rising from the chimney and the windows were warm, and it was the most beautiful thing Eleanor had ever seen, not because it was large or remarkable or more than it was, but because it was exactly what it was, no more and no less, built by honest hands for honest purposes, and now finally entirely and without reservation home. She would remember this moment later, on the ordinary days and the difficult ones, as the moment she understood completely what Lily had said to her on the platform that first afternoon, before they had even exchanged names in the fierce and certain arms of a child who prayed every night and refused to stop. Sometimes the right place does not announce itself. Sometimes you arrive at it sideways through error and accident and the accumulated weight of choices you didn't know you were making. Sometimes you get off at the wrong station, and sometimes the wrong station is the truest home you will ever find.